Bien, estamos listos, señoras y señores, así que por favor, ocupen sus lugares desde ahora, si son tan amables. Please, ladies and gentlemen, take your seats. We are ready. Everything is set now, and we're to begin. So please, take your seats. Muy bien, vamos a presentar a quienes están como oradores y ponentes en esta penúltima actividad. Tenemos al director del Centro para el Desarrollo de la OCDE, Director Development Center OECD, Mario Pezzini. Al ministro de Economía y Hacienda y exministro para la Cohesión Territorial en Italia, Ministry for Economy and Finance, former Minister for Territorial Cohesion, Italy, Fabrizio Barca. Director de la División de Estadísticas de la CEPAL, Director of the Statistics Division, UN ECLAC, Pascual Hesterfeld. Subdirector del Departamento Administrativo Nacional de Estadística, DANE, de Colombia. Deputy Director, National Statistics Department, Colombia, Carlos Prada Lombo. Y también al director ejecutivo del Instituto Nacional de Estadística y Censos de Ecuador, Executive Director, National Institute of Statistics and Census, Ecuador, José Rosero Moncayo. As moderator, Deputy Secretary General, OECD, la subsecretaria general de la OCDE, con ustedes, Mari Kiviniemi.
So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, everybody, and I'm so happy to see so many of you still present in these last minutes of the World Forum. In this session, we will discuss well-being, and special focus will be on well-being in Latin America. After full 3 days of immersion in our forum, you might be rather exhausted, but therefore you might be left with no doubt that well-being is, or at least it should be, the fundamental goal of public policies and actually the only yardstick for assessing a country's overall progress. You are all very well aware that the OECD has invested much time and resources to improve our measures of well-being and to understand how these measures can be effectively embedded in policies. And that is why we launched the OECD Better Life Initiative in 2011 with the goal to assess well-being across OECD countries and to identify the critical areas where countries should improve to deliver on well-being for their citizens. Since its start, the work on well-being had a number of spin-offs in our organization. For example, well-being evidence has now been integrated in various OECD instruments, such as our economic reviews, with the intention of informing our advice on economic policies to member countries. But well-being has also become an integral part of our work on development for non-member countries. Notably, this has been done through the OECD Development Center's multidimensional country review, which assess countries' development challenges through a holistic frame, namely the well-being one. And from this experience, we have learned that the notion of well-being is relevant for all countries, not only the rich ones. Well-being analysis can also change the policy perspective on old and new issues, suggesting fresh insights and solutions on how to improve people's lives. As you have heard during the past 3 days, well-being is also at the core of Universal Sustainable Development Goals adopted last month by the UN General Assembly. And further, it is also important to find ways to respond to the demand from developing economies for tailored measures and indicators of well-being. The challenge of development has been described by political economist Francis Fukuyama as a problem of getting to Denmark. But as Fukuyama argues, it is not very plausible that countries with a complex history, such as Latin American countries, could put in place the same institutions needed for development when these institutions took such a long time to develop in the rich world. Developing countries don't need to be told that they are not Denmarks, but they can surely learn from the experiences of countries that are closer economically, socially, and culturally to them. Latin America has been at the forefront in articulating such demands and in using the concept of buen vivir as a foundation for a range of their policies. Throughout the Americas, governments and civil society organizations have been experimenting with innovative approaches to change policies, frameworks and institutions with the common goal of improving the quality of life of their citizens. This is why the OECD has decided to engage with Latin American and Caribbean countries to launch a new initiative on measuring well-being in the region. And now we are here officially launching it today. The main goal of this initiative is to develop a set of well-being indicators adapted to the context and realities of Latin American countries. These indicators can support policy analysis and peer learning among participating countries, and it is our intention to collect indicators in a periodic and systematic manner and to include them annually in the OECD Development Center's Latin American Economic Outlook. The well-being monitoring and analysis that this new evidence will generate has the potential to guide policies in new directions beyond a focus centered only on economic growth. It can also highlight patterns and best practices among countries in the Latin American region. Further, this analysis could shed light on the drivers of success for the various well-being aspects, which can also be showcased to non-Latin American countries. Today's panelists will bring their experience to focus on how best we can do this. And let me introduce them briefly a bit more than was said in the beginning. First, Mario, Director of the OECD Development Center. And before joining the Development Center 2010, Mario held several senior management positions in OECD. And he was Deputy Director of the Public Governance and Territorial Development Directorate, and prior to that Head of Regional Policy Division. Fabrizio Barca is General Director at the Italian Ministry of Economy and Finance, where he is now involved in particular in the national strategy for inner areas, and has been previously, as was already told, Minister for Territorial Cohesion in the Italian government, Special Advisor to EU Commissioner responsible for regional policy, Division Chief at the Bank of Italy, etc. And Pascual Gassenfeld, Director of the Statistics Division, UN-ECLAC, former Director of UN-ECLAC offices in Argentina and Uruguay, and co-founder and coordinator of UN-ECLAC annual flagship publication, Social Panorama of Latin America, and Professor of Statistics and Socioeconomic Development in several universities. So to this first part of the panel, then we'll follow the next part later. But I will first turn to Mario, so if you could provide us kind of some of the basic elements of this work, well-being in Latin America, and if you could tell us Can the OECD's framework for measuring well-being be a point of departure for the type of exercise that you envision conducting in partnership with Latin American, Caribbean countries? Who are these partners and what are they expected to gain from their participation?
Muchísimas gracias. Es un placer de estar aquí y nuevamente muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much. Thank you again for having spent 3 days with us to be really attentive and participating. The question is very interesting in many sense. The answer has already been included in your words, Mary. Probably they will allow me to tell you a very simple story in how we have organized this conference in these 3 days. It has told us that well-being is fundamental, that growth is a tool, it's not a purpose, and the purpose is the well-being of people. They have told us that it is the individual, the community in which they live, that accounts for the analysis, and that is target unit as individual and regions has an important role to play, but it is not the objective. So OCDE thought about how we can measure all these indicators, and then we put it in practice to carry out an analysis. But at the end, why do we carry out this analysis? In order to be able to compare amongst countries. The objective is not to say what is Denmark at the end of the road and everybody should be equal to Denmark, but you must learn from the comparison of the other to learn what is interesting in considering what you could use in order to reposition yourself. Comparison is necessary for the work. That is the advantage of many international bodies that use this comparison, as those that are represented here in our panel. And well, the question is, what happens outside? What happens in other countries? And what happens in the region where we have country members of the OCDE? But we have heard this question before. We have an economic perspective tool that we produce every year with our brothers from the CECLAC and the CECAF. So the question was, yes, I already have that closeness. Why don't I apply this indicator as well? But the thing is how to do it. Yes, we can go into a room with all the analysts, with all these statistics, and then think if things works or not, and with the numbers produce a result, but that will be a very poor experience. Things work if countries are directly involved, if you are close to the table, and they allow you to see what is behind that data, because that is a fundamental issue. Data give us information, but the data does not enable you to organize the discussion that goes beyond the data, public policies, how people live, what you can do. So the solution where we are creating a new verb was discarded right away. The thing was, we talk to the countries, we see if there's interest or not, and it's extraordinary to see, like in Latin America, well-being is not a new concept. Well-being is an ancient concept that is integrated in national constitutions. Ecuador, Bolivia, and many others, the presence of the indigenous population is a witness of how that concept is deepened, it's rooted in the concept of Latin America. So we're very fortunate to be able to discuss how this indicator, objective and subjective, can be applied here. In February, they started to discuss with the different countries, with our brothers from the other organization, and said, can we do it or not? And obviously there's a long discussion, lengthy discussion, because difference on interpretation, of opinion, experience on dialogue and closeness, and it takes time, but it has been successful. And today we are celebrating that many countries are willing to attempt to make. There are country members of OECD like Chile and Mexico that were highly enthusiastic because they already applied these indicators. There are other countries that are interested in having a closer relationship with OECD like Colombia and Costa Rica that have always said, yes, yes, we are interested. But that's not it. There are countries like Ecuador which are really interested because what brings us together is that by discussing with each other, we can improve the tool, the heritage, and its application or enforcement. So I think that this is a starting point. It's certainly not the end of our work that we will have to follow up on. This works make sense as long as countries participate to the creation and evolution of the data by discussing, commenting, and confronting each other. And one of the first to benefit from this program is the OECD, because we have already applied these indicators in other countries. Have we compared, and we will be able to compare them to identify if they're the right ones or not. Sometimes we are obsessed with like the two guys that are in Paris in the same room, and then it says, well, one is always applauding, and they ask him, why are you always applauding? Well, because of the crocodiles. I don't want them to come and meet me up. So it's not the same. If you don't have the same view, it's quite dangerous. So I end up by saying it is a pleasure, it's a real honor. And I want to thank all the countries of Latin America that are participating, and I hope they will participate in this experience because above all, they allow us to learn. Thank you.
You said, Mario, that
Mario, mencionaste que el bienestar está en el centro de los países latinoamericanos, así que me gustaría que fuera posible
in concrete ways, when the concept of well-being has been used in certain Latin American countries.
Sí, en verdad será muy fácil de
Yeah, it would be easy to ask to our Ecuadorian colleague to say so, because it's not only part of the Ecuadorian constitution, but the efforts made by Ecuador, if allowed by Mario, I'm gonna bring him to the conversation, is how this well-being, that a concept that is not necessarily the same in other countries, can be translated in a cyclonic effort. May I ask you, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here to share opinions and reflections with you. As I was saying, the concept of development and that search of well-being is not new for Latin America. It's within the Latin American people's DNA, and we have always tried to conceptualize it. We are in the moment of trying to measure it. In particular, in Ecuador, it's part of the vision of the people living in the Andes. It's an ancestral concept, a concept that reflects several perceptions, such as that search of a life that is full and a harmony that it's not with the person itself, but a balance of that person with the nature and among people. It's a concept that it's been used by us as a development paradigm that is separated from with other paradigms in terms of accumulation, that having more is good, but it's the complete opposite. It's based on a concept that is related more of sufficiency, of having what is enough to live in harmony with the people and nature alike. As an Ecuadorian society, that's concept has been interiorized within the Constitution. You know, the Constitution is part of the social agreement that is being executed by all the members of a society and defines the path, especially for Ecuador, in terms of our vision of development, our commitment, and how public policies should act to embody that well-being. So the objective of the Ecuadorian society is attaining that well-being, and that's precisely our definition of well-being. In the Ecuadorian Statistical Department, as mentioned by Mario, is trying to crystallize that concept into something that it's operational, that can be measurable and measured. We need to start monitoring if our mission or quest as a society is to live in well-being, is how do we attain that goal. And based on the experience we have in this initiative that is being launched, we can mutually learn a lot of things in Ecuador in such a way how different countries within the world and in the region are conceptualizing that well-being, and that initiative can be enriched by the Ecuadorian perception and vision of development that we have in my country to attain the goal of that initiative, which is creating a set of indicators that has in consideration all the perspectives presented here.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Muchísimas gracias por tu respuesta tan detallada. Ahora voy a hablar con Pascual Gessenfeld.
Picture. What are, in your view, the fundamental well-being issues that confront countries in the Latin American region?
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I will take 2 minutes of my time to thank, because all that thanking process will be to the OECD and INEGI of that idea that is fundamental to bring to this 5th World Forum to Latin America. It's fundamental to what we are launching now, because it could not have been launched from elsewhere. And as said in the title, statistic knowledge and policy is fundamental for us, and as mentioned by you, Mrs. Murray, for CECLAC, there are several pillars within its knowledge. As you mentioned, in the difference between not searching to become Dinamarca, I remember 2 of CECLAC knowledge pillars that I would like to mention here before starting my intervention. One is that I have always defended the structural historic method of development analysis, and that is in terms of understanding differently concepts, as mentioned by Mario Pecini, how and why, how he creatively, and I will talk about him because he has been one of the pillars of this process, how ECLAC was reached by him telling we should work together in this in conjunction with the countries. And we are collaborating with Ecuador in several arenas. And certainly what Ecuador has in its constitution, it's not new. It's something that dates way back. I'm talking about ancestors, an ancestor of CECLAC that you all know, Mr. Raul Previs, leave us as his legacy one quote but that is known by people that has been around for several times. And that quote was said to several people that managed to get here in the region, to talk with him in the region. He said, observe reality before thinking, and then think and discuss. And that's what Mario proposed when we started discussing this topic. And he proposed it several years ago with the Latin American economic outlook. So for CECLAC, I didn't mention the second fundamental pillar, but will eventually appear, which is that indivisibility of the concept of development. We could not continue working with a panorama that is only considering growth and productivity. We all know that that's a tool for well-being. For us, and you all know here in Latin America that trilogy of equality and well-being is an element that we want to add and that fosters democratic well-being. That's a fundamental topic and that's something that has been attained with a lot of effort by this region. So well-being is not an objective in itself, but an objective that is strengthening other development objectives that are crucial to coexist in peace and in a democracy. So, what I wanted to do is to make a reflection on how we conceive this activity as a learning process in a path of strength. First of all, what I wanted to say is that we should be reminded that something that has been mentioned in this day, and we should not confuse objectives with instruments. Statistics and policies and institutions are instruments. So to be at the same level of what the policies require that are oriented to well-being and democratic coexistence, they should be based on evidence, and that's one of the biggest commitments that give us a reason why we are working in collaboration with the OECD. As Mario mentioned, with that institutional perspective that we are an instrument to attain well-being in our societies. And that instrument can only work if someone go to the etymological roots of cooperation. Cooperation is operation in conjunction, and only if it's done, as Mario said, in conjunction, about the institution and the countries, and with openness to see it in different dimensions of well-being and with different perspectives, because the same dimensions seen from different sides can have different interpretations. And now I'm recalling the movie where the professor stands on the desk, Dead Poets Society, to teach his students how the same dimension can have different perspectives. So without being as harsh as that movie was, because it had a lot of reflection in it, I think that we should consider that that reflection should have that openness in terms of dimension and vision regarding the concept. Thirdly, I would like to emphasize that this is structure that has been worked under in the latest years in terms of well-being has a personal vision that has been shared a lot by me within the institution and my colleagues. I think we have an important synergy with the OECD given and the countries as well, because the institution has always been working for and to the institution. But as Mario mentioned, we are used to working with a several number of countries, and the study center allows us to work with a set of countries that are outside the formal institutionalization but are part of the OECD family, and thus they are part of the Latin American family. That makes OECD to have the capacity to strengthen the virtuous circuits and improvement and inclusive growth. On the other hand, in my opinion, and given the structural heterogeneity history that our societies and countries have, in CECLAC, we have developed that based on our path, the capacity to analyze how to deactivate vicious circuits of inequality, low productivity, and low inclusiveness of growth. So we are specialized despite the same objective in different perspectives. Not they are different in themselves, but they force us to analyze them with a more ample strategic vision with intention to reach a meeting point and see how to deactivate these vicious circuits and activate virtuous circuits. And that would be our biggest challenge that would be faced by this study. And its inclusion in this study that based on the panorama presented by this would be an asset for all the countries, the institutions, and the remaining countries that will be added to the institution. In particular, with the OECD team, we have a path in the latest year with Martin Duran in particular, that within the region we had to share our work with the OECD to the world. This IC30 program that is precisely that we can create the parity of purchase level to compare well-being in terms of that regard. So it's an honor for me to be here. And I thank you for the invitation because it allows us, after passing a lot of time and spending a lot of time in the same path, to share the same route. And effectively, I would like to add a quote. First, I thank you for using a very colloquial title to the challenge, and that is how is Latin America doing? And that means how ample the study will be. It's not something structured and close-minded that has to do with closing and locking doors. And that made me remind about a Uruguayan minister that as an agricultural minister, every time he received a project at his desk, he said, "You are milking in your desks." And that's something we don't want. You are milking cows in your desk, and that's something we don't want. We want to know the Latin American reality, and that's something that is being done by us on a regular basis. And as Antonio Machado mentioned, Walker, there is no pathway. You need to create your own path. And that's something that will be done in this study in conjunction with the OECD, the countries, and everyone that is reaching out to this project to see how Latin America is doing with this holistic approach. And with that openness of mind that brings us to this region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pascal, very much for your intervention and your very comprehensive answer. And now I turn to Fabrizio. You were Special Advisor to EU Commissioner for Regional Policy, and you have been one of the masterminds behind the EU policy reform of the EU policy on social cohesion. And one of the main goals of this reform was that of all EU-supported programs for regional development should spell out the pathways through which they are expected to improve people's well-being. So based on this experience and also your experience as a minister, so could you tell us in what tangible ways can measures of well-being be integrated into effective public policy making, and what kind of obstacles you see when it comes to this marriage between well-being and policy making?
Thank you for the question. I'll be very glad to share very few thoughts on this issue, and I'm glad to share it in a session which very appropriately you chose at the end, just before the conclusion of this conference, to hold, and looking ahead is in the spirit of your organization of this whole conference and of the hosting organizations, which I take the opportunity to thank for the extraordinary organization and for the hospitality, but for the quality of every single moment. There was an issue of jumping from one place to another for 3 days and missing on something, like when you have 2 ice creams and you don't know what to choose. So thank you again, and thank you for this end, and thank you for you that opening up to this innovation. We are looking ahead. In looking ahead, you obviously have an opportunity, you already said it. It is not just an opportunity for you, it's an opportunity for all of us. Because whenever new ideas, a new culture, and new come on board, then we all have to rethink. And we move something because we tend to stabilize. We've done something, now we're happy, 23 indicators for house life, and then for sustainable. Now that's it, and it's good that you bring us and you make us rethink. So it's an opportunity for all of us. From my experience, both at Italian level and at the European level, in an effort to make sure that we would have a more result-oriented policy. That was the slogan of the cohesion policy, the turning of 2014 in the whole of Europe. Let's make it more result-oriented, where result does not mean output, it means outcome. It means what kind of improvements are we expecting to take place in well-being of people? And then only this question allows you to pass to the second question. Why should what we are doing be improving that well-being? Sometimes we policymakers on the way, on the path to do something, completely forget about even why we did decide to do X or Y. We just know that the result that we're expecting is to do a bridge, to do training, to perform or introduce a certain policy measure. But we've completely forgotten about why we're doing it. And to have the well-being indicators there is a reminder for me, I'm a public administrator, is a reminder of my daily job of why we are doing it, and that there are some people that expect a result, that the result is not spending the money. For God's sake, it's not spending the money. So that's a very short answer. And any move ahead in building and in allowing indicators, taking some courage in not choosing that indicator that actually completely fit your own culture, your own country. I mean, we and the Germans, we and the Brits in Europe, we're always, that is not exactly the indicator is picking up on what I think is the well-being of people. Okay, but it's worthwhile having a compromise and choosing something that allows some comparison, providing that there won't be just rankings. Providing the numbers will be used in order to ask questions, to see how we move ahead, or to allow citizens to say, this is not exactly, okay, you improved in that direction, but what about in the other feature of my well-being, which is not being measured, and which sometimes is not benefiting from the same policy, which is benefiting indicator X. This is the experimental way of conceiving the use of indicators in this day's world. So you have this amazing, you have the opportunity, and from my experience, I tell you just three bottom lines. One, you already said, the opportunity to adjust gradually from the indicators that already exist, that are already on the table, and that you have already on your table, and to make some adjustments. I would love to see your thinking. I would be curious in the next few months during your process to see your thinking on the subjective indicators, for example, referring to house life. There are at least 5 subjective indicators. It's worthwhile mentioning them at the end of a conference that I had this book. The satisfaction with water quality, perceived health status, perceived social network, life satisfaction, and a self-reported assault. These are important indicators, but they are controversial indicators. So I'd be curious to see how the experience that you have developed in this continent, your own perception, your own studies, how they can contribute to the understanding of how worthwhile these indicators are. The second layer, it has to do with my attention of the last 15 years of my life to within countries differences. We do have in Europe a major within countries difference. I do have in Italy a major within country difference, which is not just south to north, because there are some southern regions which are moving ahead and some northern regions which are moving to the bottom. And you do have, linked to nature of your country, to the ethnical issues, to the differences between groups, an issue that was brought to the fore at the beginning of the conference by Joseph Stiglitz. You do have within countries differences. And for example, again, this report has a section on it, but I'm sure that you could move ahead and help all of us moving ahead in this direction. I mentioned two areas, health and education. You do have amazing health statistics that allow to check the improvement of the well-being of people, meaning the satisfaction of the right to be cured independently of who you are, where you were born. This is a fundamental right, that it is even in my constitution, since the constitution were mentioned, and it is measurable, and there are measures of health that could probably be introduced. And the second one, which allow you to see that you're probably cured in a very different way in one area of a country rather than in a different area of the country, in the mountains rather than in the towns. And a second area, for which I'm thankful to the ECD, by the way, is the area of education. In Italy, for example, we decided to ask and financed the PISA inquiry and investigation and measurement to be regionalized. There were too many differences within the country, and we have areas of the north which are sort of extremely high competence in mathematics and in reading. Areas in the south where 40% of the kids are falling behind even the worst of the levels. Their life is compromised right from the beginning of the game. But we need to know that. So the regional, having competence by region can be done extensively. We did it, and it helped us improving in one of the regions of the south by making it part of the public debate. And the last point has to do with policy, more appropriately to your question. The opportunity I think you have by benefiting of those of us who have already moved in this direction is to think ahead of the policy use more than what we did. In all three areas that this conference has amazingly covered, one, which is the point of reference of the Secretary General, is awareness, rising awareness. But how exactly are we going to rise awareness? How are we exactly going to make sure that all people will know those numbers, that newspapers will actually publish them, and that by publishing and commenting them, they will actually explain what they're about, not just using ranking in order to throw blame and name and shame with rising issues which are not awareness issues. So how will you do that? And also the second one, how are you going to use it in what I myself call it informed destabilization? Which are those two or three indicators, not all of them, that fit so much in your policy design that you might want to actually use them more actively, more passionately, more forcefully towards the administrations of the country. And finally, of course, how are we going to use them in the sending phase, in the monitoring phase? How are we going to make sure that we monitor them, but also, and I finish on that, how do we make sure, and we learned that from many presentations in this conference, how do we give a chance to active citizen organizations which out of need to hurry were not necessarily involved in the initial process, where we actually took the responsibility to choose some indicators. How do we allow them to interact and to integrate some of the indicators that we put on the table with indicators that they are perceiving to be relevant measure of well-being in a process which doesn't stop, in a way that doesn't stop the process of moving ahead, but it does allow surrounding our indicators with satellite indicators that maybe will be used in one area and not in another. We are looking forward. I'm personally looking forward to your experience. It's going to be helpful to all of us.
Thank thank you very much, all of you, you three, Mario, Pascal and Fabrizio, for your very powerful insights. And now we turn to the second part of this session. To country level, we already heard from Ecuador your experiences and some concrete examples of how the concept of well-being is really part of your country's policies already very heavily now. But first I would like to give the floor to Carlos Prada, Deputy Director from National Administrative Department of Statistics from Colombia, because it was already mentioned that this exercise will be done hand in hand with national statistics offices in participating countries. So, Carlos Prada, would you please give us your views how this initiative is relevant to your country?
Bueno, mucho gusto en estar aquí con ustedes.
I am pleased to be here in the presentation of Director Prefecti. It's an honor to be here with you discussing this agenda that has been so important to develop our societies. First of all, I would like to say that for Dane, it's a big challenge to be part of this initiative that we put at your order all our knowledge and tools that we have to continue with this effort that will change the paradigm in how we are currently living certain variables, how we are offering information so that governments can make prompt and accurate decisions. In that regard, I would like to tell you how we in DANE in Colombia since a while how to offer statistics that are accurate and prompt. We conducted the agricultural census that had 45 years after its last edition. And considering what the minister said, for us it's knowing all the differences within the country is very important for us because Colombia has very particular conditions. We have indigenous and African descending population, and they live in the outside areas, in the outskirts, and we would like to have statistics to know what has been happening in that regions of Colombia. We attained to all rural lands and we collected all the necessary information to conduct a diagnosis that in most of the cases was the first time that it was being done, that despite it was the third edition of the agricultural census, it was the first time that an statistics related institution was going there to collect information. For us it was a challenge because we asked many things and it may seem that we are connected without being involved in that initiative because within the census we are being asked about the well-being, and as you know or are well aware, Colombia has been experiencing an internal conflict that we hope ends soon. That's why it's very important to learn to understand the difference between the rural and the urban sectors. So my suggestion or a comment that I'm respectfully sharing with you, we should consider all those differences between the urban and the rural sectors. For instance, in Colombia it's different to talk about the rural sectors that are near the cities. If you take a plane or you go to the Pacific area or the Guajira area, it's an important topic to be considered. We're changing the paradigm in conjunction with the prefect, Ereti Sugeralgo. We're trying to change these statistics because we're aiming to provide information in the important moment that is being experienced by Colombia. So this initiative for us and for the OECD, whom we have had tied an important relation with, it's a win-win situation because we will be learning from this initiative and we will show how rich, how this process of building this information has been. And it will be worthwhile for you to see the database that is being anonymized so that any researcher or any person that would like to make a download of it is actually able to do it. And that will be our contribution so that other countries in the same circumstance would experience a progress in that regard. Additionally, these exercises will be showing us how and where to we are aiming in terms of these regions and how within the Latin American bloc we can start seeking after a more cohesive society. That's why we tell you, you can count on us for anything you need. The DANE is an institution that is trying to be more modern every time, and it's putting all this information available to you because we're trying to provide information that public policy that is our greatest pride since the last edition of the agricultural census will be showing how the people living there and their quality of life is. And after all this analysis that the Director Prefective mentioned, we should go to the newspapers and say, because it's making a round of 12 presentations in all the regions in Colombia to show how the agricultural census was like, to provide information that is a more modern and more transparent statistical institution based on the reality experience in Colombia and consistent with the development experience in Latin America. For us, we feel proud to be working with you, and it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm representative of the National Administrative Department of Statistics.
Now I give the floor to Jose Rosario, please.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Mucho de lo que tenía que decir ya lo dije en mi primera presentación, tal vez complementarla con algunas cosas. El Ecuador no es un país que es miembro de la OECD. No es un país que es miembro tampoco del Instituto de Desarrollo de la OECD. Sin embargo, para nosotros, como les decía en mi primera intervención, está dentro del ADN, básicamente, de los ecuatorianos, estar conceptualizando un nuevo paradigma de desarrollo y medirlo, ¿sí? Es responsabilidad fundamental, una encomienda directa del señor Presidente de la República al Instituto Nacional de Estadística y Censos el poder medir, ¿sí? Medir justamente este paradigma del buen vivir, poder construir unas métricas para que nosotros podamos monitorearlo y seguirlo en el tiempo. Entonces, para nosotros la alianza con OECD, porque lo vemos así como una alianza de pares, es fundamental.
It's fundamental, it's natural. It is natural because we are aiming at the same objectives. To that regard, we can learn joint from one and the others, as I was saying about this experience. Mainly, we can nourish the concept frame used by the OCDE applied for Latin America of this paradigm of the equator that it's putting on the table. And we can nourish from the focus on the concept frame that the indicators of the OECD have at present, as well as the indicators that they are using to operate that approach. I am telling you this alliance is a natural alliance, and on the other hand, and I want to conclude with this, is about the methodology. Pascual has also mentioned it. I highlight the methodology of approaching the countries, and so we can jointly develop knowledge and we will be able to put it into practice, new well-being measures. Why am I saying this? Because normally the approach of carrying out this exercise that we are starting today by the international bodies is a desk approach. I will follow the words that Pascual said, where he obviously you have this framework at a desk, regardless of the country. According to that frame, you measure the different indicators or you build metrics upon them, And then the countries just receive a report, a document, over which we have to give an answer or comment, or to which society makes comments. But that is not the right approach, and I think that the OECD has now the right approach, so we can sit down, share knowledge, because we can benefit from their experience and can launch this initiative to build a set of indicators that will be relevant for Latin America and the Caribbean countries.
The panelists for this very interesting discussion. I'm sure every one of yours would have participated in this debate also by their insights, your insights, or asking questions, but I think that this was a very good conversation already, which made everybody clear what is it all about in this initiative, and I think that this made really an excellent start and launch to our initiative. So thank you very much.
Bien, señoras y señores, les pedimos permanecer en sus lugares, ya que, como podrán imaginarse, estamos listos para la última sesión de nuestro quinto foro de la OCDE en estadísticas, conocimiento y política. Es momento de las conclusiones. It is time to conclusions, so please stay at your seats. Thank you.